Thank you. Appreciate that. That's very helpful. All right. So I wanted to do a short review of the last class that we enjoyed. Oh, by the way, this is Rabbi Lawrence Kushner here in the baseball cap. Man after my own heart. Nothing like going through life with a baseball cap on your head. And of course, this is the cover of the book, Honey from the Rock. So, from the wisdom of contemporary Rabbi Emanuel Shachet, who is a Lubavitcher, I believe, discovered this nice, handy description of Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. So, firstly, Jewish mysticism is based on the giving of Torah at Sinai, which was both a historical event and a public event. An historical event that included God and included the transmission of Torah to a collective, us, our ancestors. So what makes Jewish mysticism authentic is that it's based on that initial revelation. Now, of course, from a Reform perspective, we don't look at revelation as a one-time thing. It's a very traditional Orthodox perspective that revelation took place at Sinai once. One thing we can agree on is that this was an historical and public event. Next, Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism reflects God's inspiration, and the Torah is, in a sense, a product of that inspiration, right? Whether God gave the Torah to Moses at Sinai or whether we were inspired, Moses was inspired to write the Torah, either way, it reflects not only Sinai, an historic public moment, but also God's inspiration. Third, Torah is traditionally seen as the exclusive basis for Kabbalistic claims, not some other tradition, not what somebody's thinking about, personal opinions, the Torah itself. That said, because of that connection with Torah as the legitimate source, authentic Jewish mysticism becomes an integral part of Torah, becomes part of our authenticating story. Kabbalah defined or translated means tradition. Likabel, which is the infinitive, kuf, beit, lamed, has to do with receiving. So in a sense, a Kabbalah is receiving the tradition. So you've heard of the term Kabbalat Shabbat, right? It's a popular notion. What is Kabbalat Shabbat? If you translate it, you can unmute yourself, or you can write in the chat box.
Welcoming Shabbat.
Yeah. Or receiving Shabbat. Or taking in the tradition of Shabbat. So the last bullet point here, by way of introduction, in a way is a recap of just how important it is that we root this tradition in Torah. This is not just, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get rid of that. It's not just what this rabbi has to say or what that rabbi has to say. It's not just what the sages have to say about the meaning of life, but it is a true reflection of Torah. It is a true reflection of Jewish law. With its roots where? At Sinai and in the gift of Torah. Any questions so far? Feel free to raise your hand. I will try to see you. If not, you can put questions in the chat box, and Cassandra will help me pay attention to those questions. All right, so next, we want to look at a picture. What's the first thing you see here?
How about you need to scroll or advance the slideshow?
I did.
It's still showing the front slide for me, the top slide.
Right.
Okay, let us try and fix that. That is unfortunate. I'll be right back here. Let's stop share. Okay, let's screen share again, see what happens. Now what happened? What do you see?
There you go.
Okay, hopefully we can not have to do that every time.
I think a glass of wine.
Okay,
Or it's two people.
so one of you, the first thing you see is a glass of wine or a goblet. Another person said you see two people, profiles looking at each other nose to nose.
And I see both.
And you see both. Right. Well, so here's the deal. Here's the deal. Psychologically speaking, it is possible to see both, but not at the same time. There's a tiny little space that allows your brain to sort of adjust from goblet to profiles and back. That is not something that is technically happening at the same time, at least according to psychologists and scientists. There's a small little space in between those two realities.
Yeah, I could see that.
And we might think of that tiny little space that sort of builds that bridge between those dual realities that are happening simultaneously. In our heads, we know that there's a goblet there and that there are two profiles. They are both there. Even if we can't see them at the same time, we know that both realities exist. In a sense, Jewish mysticism is a recognition that those dual realities exist, even if we have a hard time seeing them at the same time. We might even think of Jewish mysticism as that tiny space of recognition or transition from goblet to profiles and back. This, of course, is an abstract thought, but it seems to suggest that it's that little space, that little portal that allows us to engage in the greater awareness that, in fact, there are two simultaneous realities. And maybe if we get really good at our mysticism, we'll be able to overcome whatever physical constraints we have in being able to see both realities at the same time. That's way out there in my mind. I think it's sufficient to say simply that there are multiple realities in life, and sometimes the difference between those multiple realities is like just a split moment of recognition. And that split moment of recognition becomes an opening or a doorway or a portal to something special and sacred. So, what about this drawing? What do you see?
Aleph.
So we see an olive. Now, do you think the olive is kind of superimposed on a kind of a blackish background? Or is it cut out of that background?
To me, it looks like it's cut out. And I
Okay.
can't tell what the background is. It's obviously something. There's some energy going on there.
Right. So
Looks like a knitted background.
Yeah, so it's not completely black and dark. It has almost like a kind of a lacy,
Yeah.
like an embroidered, a loosely embroidered feel, right? It creates enough of a solid background so that we're not quite sure whether the olive is superimposed on the background or is cut out of it. The reality is it could be both, right? You can't really tell
Right.
definitively, not unless we were like touching it with our fingers. So relative to our visual understanding of what we see, you know, it's sort of both realities. I think one of the ways to understand Jewish mysticism is this pursuit of understanding that there's not just one reality. There are multiple realities, some of which we can't really tell the difference in the moment, but exist because we can shift our perspective enough to recognize the other reality. And then kind of working backward, you know that, well, I see the white olive on a black background, or I see the olive cut out of the black background, so it looks white, but it's really an open space, you know. Those both realities are true. And so mysticism has a way of finding truth in multiple realities. And our job is to kind of sort out those multiple truths vis-a-vis the way we look at things, how we change our perspective, even if it's a little tiny bit of shifting. I realize that some of these ideas are very abstract. So if it's just completely out there, you have to absolutely have permission to say, Rabbi, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'll try to explain it better. The vignettes, I think, are good at helping us understand what this is all about. So if there are questions, I will take them now. If you want to put stuff in the chat box, feel free. I hope everybody knows how to use the chat box. All right, if I move this slide, do you see something that says the first gate?
Yes.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, so do we know how to say gate in Hebrew?
Shar.
Shar. All right, so we have the first shar here, the first gate, and it's called the Midbar, HaMidbar, which is, in our mystical perspective, the wilderness of preparation. What does a gate do, just in general?
It either keeps people out or it lets people in.
Okay, perfect. Keeps people out, keeps people in. All right. In this case, I like to think of our sha'ar as an opening, a portal, a doorway, an invitation, a call forward. The gate opens, we are beckoned in. In this case, HaMidbar, the Midbar, the wilderness, the desert. So the question is, what is the power of the Midbar? To invite our spiritual journey. So it might be useful just to jot down an idea or two in the chat box or say it out loud.
I have a question.
How is the desert a spiritual place for you? I guess is the question I want to ask. Ruben, you're upside down. Hello. Ellen, you had a question.
Yeah. This might be incredibly jumping ahead, but the Kabbalah as the Jewish book of mysticism. In college, I studied witchcraft, and I think that the Kabbalah has something to do with the foundation of witchcraft also. Is that correct?
I can't speak to that. We will have to discover another rabbi to opine on that. I don't know enough about the origins of witchcraft and its connection to Kabbalah.
I can tell you that alchemists in the Middle Ages, and then later Masons, like Freemasons, they co-opted a lot of Kabbalistic symbols. I can also tell you that Kabbalah was profoundly influential on the practice of tarot reading.
Well, there you go.
I have a question.
Cassandra, what on earth would I do without you?
I have a question.
I can answer that question.
Okay. I have a question about
Yes, Mary.
preparation.
Yes.
I get wilderness, and the wilderness is unknown, maybe the unknown.
Okay.
I don't see how the wilderness of preparation is represented by a gate.
Okay. Well, we're gonna dive into that. Okay.
Okay, good.
Let's put that question. In fact, Cassandra, if you would please maybe write that in the chat box so we remember the question.
Doing that as we speak, actually.
And we want to make sure to save our chats. Let's ask a more general question, right? Let's kind of construct a reality that allows us to understand in a sense, what the desert means to us in the first place. Let's develop a concrete understanding of what it means to be in the desert. How is the desert a place that supports, sustains, inspires our spirit? I'm assuming that it does. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. But if it does, how might it impact us? Can you think of a way? Firstly, how many people have been in the desert? Okay. May seem like a pedestrian question, but I'm trying to construct a reality that we somehow share here.
Spend almost.
Tell me
week
more
there,
about the
like
desert experience. In what ways is spiritual experience?
I think because the desert is, in many ways, devoid of distractions.
Okay, good. So let's write that down. Devoid of distractions. What else?
I disagree. I think the desert has these bizarre plants and unusual, unexpected terrain
Okay.
that I find it not devoid of distraction.
Okay, so fine. You know what? I think you're both right. Remember, it's a mysticism class, multiple reality.
Yeah.
You know, the desert is surprising and unusual. What else? What else on our list? Well, you know, some people think, wow, the desert's a harsh and barren place. Is it a harsh and barren place only?
Ben suggests that the desert is a place to connect with God.
Okay, desert is a place to connect with God.
Mhm.
Good.
I concur with that.
My first desert experience was really that because I think the Sinai was the first desert. The Sinai or the Negev were the first deserts that I was ever in. So I definitely felt a spirituality. I also think that the beauty of the desert is something that you experience in many ways close up. You have to go looking for the vibrancy of the desert.
Right. It's going to be hard for us to understand this vital impact of the desert from the comfort of our own homes online. You could look at all the pictures of the desert in the world, and it's not the same as feeling the sand in your toes, or feeling the heat on your back, or feeling thirsty, literally thirsty under the hot sun. And of course, the desert, as it pertains to our history, remember, Kabbalah is grounded in history and the history of Sinai. Sinai is where? In the desert. It's in the desert, supposedly. It's in the desert. So somehow or another, being in the desert leaves us open to surprises, to revelation, to some kind of spiritual opening. All right. I'm going to move now to our first vignette. It's a vignette that I like to share often. Can you see the vignette? God led the people around.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Marilu, could I impose upon you to read this particular slide?
Okay. The wilderness is not just a desert through which we wandered for 40 years. It is a way of being, a place that demands being open to the flow of life around you, a place that demands being honest with yourself without regard to the cost in personal anxiety, a place that demands being present with all of yourself. In the wilderness, your possessions cannot surround you. Your preconceptions cannot protect you. Your logic cannot promise you the future. Your guilt can no longer place you safely in the past. You are left alone each day with an immediacy that astonishes, chastens, and exalts. You see the world as if for the first time. Now you might say that the promise of such spiritual awareness could only keep one with the greatest determination in the wilderness, but for a moment or so, that such a way of being would be like breathing pure oxygen. We would live our lives in but a few hours and die of old age. It's better for us to serve the Egyptians and die in the wilderness. And indeed, that is your choice.
What a powerful, powerful statement, powerful vignette that brings the desert into view as a place that beckons our honesty. It's a place that allows us to face the things that are difficult. So, for example, why do you think it becomes so difficult for us sometimes to be honest with ourselves? What does it take for us to be fully present in who we are as is? How do we live a life where we're not always protected by our preconceptions? These are some of the big questions that come out. So what does it mean? You know, why aren't we as honest as maybe we'd like to be? You can think about that. You can put a notion in the chat box. You can say something out loud. I want to try and figure out how we relate to these words. They're beautiful and powerful. What does it mean that we are honest to the point where it doesn't matter what the personal anxieties are that come of that honesty?
It just seems to me that if in the last sentences, if we did live like that, we couldn't take it very long.
Okay, all right. So
Yeah, it's an
the
interesting.
assumption is that the reason we're not as honest is because being honest is going to somehow, we're going to have to confront something that makes us anxious. How long can you live within that? So it's probably
Not very long.
No, and it's probably easier for us in a sense to delude ourselves, because then at least we're protected from that anxiety. However, what's the challenge with that philosophy or practice? We won't really come clean on who we really are. And we might be living in Egypt again as a result of that.
But it's better. It's better. It's the last sentences are. It's like you can't really do this. You can't really face this. We can't do it. That's what it says.
Well, actually, what it says, it says, yes, we would live our lives, but for a few hours in sort of this moral purity, and we die of old age because it was like breathing oxygen constantly. And so the question is it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And indeed, that is your choice. I'm not sure this is where Rabbi Kushner is taking us, but you should make that choice to go back to Egypt. I think what he's saying is take your chances on finding a way to be honest, because the anxieties will be a trap ultimately. Now, of course, getting to Sinai, moving towards the promised land, is a journey that gives us life, right? So we're not actually going to die in the wilderness, are we?
No. Well, some of them did.
The story bears out in our favor, right? We're on a journey. We're going to talk about the power of that journey itself being even more powerful than the destination. But they're trying to talk about the true power of the desert as a place that will open us up to a more honest outlook on our lives, a place where we can dismantle the preconceptions that keep us from personal growth. By the way, you're a slave just leaving the land of Egypt.
Yeah.
What preconceptions might you have about yourself?
That I'm not worth much.
Yeah. The worst part of slavery is somehow destroys any type of intrinsic value you may have of yourself. Certainly Pharaoh didn't see you as having intrinsic value. So all of a sudden you're going to be catapulted to freedom and you're going to say, hey, I'm great. I've got self-value and worth. That might be.
We start with this, that we wandered for 40 years there.
Yeah.
And so what did we play all this honesty out in the 40 years? Is that what it's saying?
Well, look, I mean, Moses probably would agree to a lot of honest emotion and outbursts of people afraid, unaware, struggling with faith, struggling to feel good about themselves, struggling to eat and find a drink, you know, to have their a thirst quenched, you know, coming to a level of spiritual awareness. We're no longer slaves. We're free people, need to act with responsibility. There were a lot of challenges to being so open to that new reality that some actually wanted to do what?
Go back.
Go back.
Yeah.
Better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. They were not necessarily living lives with Torah imprinted on their hearts. They were not living lives where preconceived notions about their capacity to be human beings created in God's image. They've forgotten all about that. No intrinsic worth, no value, no place that keeps them safe. Egypt's not safe. The Midbar's not safe. Nowhere to hide. But in that openness, there's growth. In that openness, there is uplift. In that openness, there is spiritual awareness that astonishes and chastens and exalts. All of it. It amazes, it disciplines, and it makes us wonder and praise. All of that. And it's powerful. And no, we can't live in the desert, you know, constantly forever and ever. I mean, people live in the desert, but they like have houses and air conditioning and water and food.
And preconceptions.
Right.
I have a famous.
Even the Bedouins have these beautiful shady tents that keep them cool in a way. So, you know, the desert is a place for us to build a level of awareness, but it's not a place that we just sort of stop and never journey forward. Because I think it then becomes like breathing pure oxygen and it will shorten our existence. Comments, questions?
That has an interesting comment that he placed in the chat box.
Yes, let's have it listen.
The desert teaches us the importance of chesed when dealing with others.
Yeah, well, listen, I think that the Israelites, in some ways, were at their best on the way to the promised land, on their journey, because it required a lot of hands-on, actively practiced chesed, kindness. You get into the Holy Land and you establish the land and people kind of grow away from the power of community to convene and congeal them. They start taking care of themselves and not others. I mean, this is the whole passion behind the prophetic literature. It's you've arrived and your life is good and you have all that you need and you've stopped taking care of people. You stop living the Torah. You stop being kind. It's not about just making sacrifices to God. It's about being kind to everybody. And so in the desert, they were more chastened. They lived with greater desperation, to sort of fill their freedom with active responsibility, chesed being one of them. Ellen, did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say that maybe he's actually saying, okay. I think that the statement, the paragraph is talking about being through the desert and being who you really are and observing things and taking it in and letting it affect you and opening up your mind and your thoughts to what the world and life is about.
Yes.
Opposed to living as a slave in Egypt and being told what to do and being miserable.
Right.
So I often wonder, you know, why it took 40 years to get there. It's not that far. But I also wonder a lot of things about what I hear. It's in the Torah. So, which I won't go into that because it's a different topic totally.
You're segueing beautifully into the next text, by the way.
So I can't believe that first paragraph is everything we're supposed to be hearing here. I think we kind of overanalyze it.
We're moving on. But here's why the desert's so important. desert's a wide open space in which our sense of spiritual becoming takes place. It's like a wide open cauldron, to draw back to your witchcraft comment, right? It's a place where we're going to be forged into new reality and a new sensibility. But we're coming from a very narrow place. Egypt, Mitzrayim, literally means narrow place.
Mm-hmm.
And so we make it out of that narrow place, and it lets us out into a wide open space.
I think it also allowed the people to have their own thoughts.
Yeah.
Whereas when they were slaves, they weren't able to.
Right.
I
And
just
that's
recently
ultimately-
watched The Prince of Egypt, which is a cartoon, but it had some good ideas in there.
Right.
And they even have a disclaimer at the beginning of the movie that states that it's loosely based on, it's the basic theme, but they made up some of their own story for it. But they weren't able to think. They weren't able to think about what they wanted to do in their downtime because there was no downtime. They watched people be beaten and killed next to them. They watched people starve. They watched, they had a horrible, stressful life. And being in the desert without having any of that, maybe there's other stressors about how to get along with others, but still you get to be yourself and understand and discover who you really are.
Yes. Perfect.
If I
Ruth?
may- I was gonna say, if I may jump in on something that Ellen started asking, the 40 years was supposed to take away a generation, but how do you take a generation if what we are told in the Bible, people lived supposedly to 900 years old?
So, right. I wouldn't take it literally.
I know. I'm just saying.
But there's something about the journey that makes a lot of sense, right? It's not just the destination, but the journey. And so Rabbi Fine offers in a very famous poem that we often read at the end of someone's life, life is a journey of sacred pilgrimage. So what is the relationship between one's slavery, all right, and then one's liberation, and then the journey that follows that liberation? Incidentally, by the way, the word cherut, freedom, chet resh vav taf, cherut, is not just freedom from Pharaoh. Cherut is a freedom to sort of make your life accordingly to whatever it is you feel you want to make it. In this case, Torah is the key ingredient to a life that is full of cherut. Right? Having Torah imprinted upon our hearts, having the responsibilities for chesed or tzedakah or hilah, forgiveness, or tikkun olam, healing the world, loving our neighbors, seeking peace, etc. All these come from an act of freedom to be responsibility, freedom to be responsible for living out the Torah. So why don't we read this text and find out the significance of the journey itself? Iris, please. It is no accident.
It is no accident that we all began as slaves in Egypt, and that he who is also known as a consuming fire only once interceded in our affairs, to bring an entire people out into a wilderness where they could meet him. He told them of a promised land, but it was never delivered, not to them. How long do you suppose it remained a secret? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? No one could be that naive. Sooner or later, everyone must have understood that this ancient, only God did not really want them to get there. He only wanted them to be on their way, which is the wilderness. What's your hurry? Where are you going? To the promised land? The other side of the wilderness? You aren't going to live the 40 years. Your feet will never splash in the Jordan. For you and me, life is not going to change. From oasis to oasis, there will be enough food and water to live modestly. A tent, content, a pillar of cloud by day, A Chevrolet, a frame house with a white fence and a mortgage, a screen door banging shut from children with sneakers and popsicles in summer, a fire at night to keep the wild beasts away.
Okay, so we have this interesting juxtaposition of a life in the desert, and then it kind of morphs into what?
Life in suburbia.
Right. So there's sort of a reflection of the American dream, maybe, or something like that. The sleepy, lazy days of summer, and popsicles from the ice cream man or woman or person, right? So Ruben, to your point about the 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of lock into that as saying, oh, okay, it's going to be a generation of becoming, sorting out what it means to live a life of freedom. It seems to suggest that it's like, Mommy, how long is it going to take? 20 minutes.
Are we there yet?
Yeah,
Right. Are we there yet? It's kind of like an are we there yet? So they say, 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. It just keeps evolving to the point where you start to grow skeptical about whether or not that number means anything. And maybe it doesn't have to mean anything. Maybe it's really all about what's in front of you and being present. And knowing that in the wilderness, it's not about rushing towards a goal. It's about becoming in the moment and building up those moments of becoming and growing and evolving as a result. And it will take you where it takes you. Whether it's to an oasis or to a house with a white picket fence, or it's to the promised land.
Or the end of the pandemic?
Or the end of the pandemic. Yes. Hopefully that's not too long from now. Right? We're not going to hold our breath. We're going to stay inside and be safe as best we can, unless we have to go out and do something heroic and take care of people.
But people keep asking when.
Yeah, that's a big question. And look.
And the deadline keeps moving.
What's that?
The deadline keeps moving.
The deadline keeps moving. So, by the way, it reminds me of something called the Stockdale Principle. So, Admiral Stockdale ran for vice president on Ross Perot's ticket. You may remember him.
Ah, okay.
Admiral Stockdale was a prisoner of war, and something called the Stockdale Principle associated with him. I read about it in a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, who was formerly a business school professor at Stanford University. And the Stockdale Principle basically came as a result of Admiral Stockdale's unique capacity not to look too far ahead. Clearly wanted to be liberated. Clearly he didn't want to be a prisoner of war. But he found that there were other POWs around him who had certain goals, like, I'm going to be out of here by Christmas. Not an unworthy goal, not an abnormal goal, wonderful hope. But then Christmas rolls around and they're still incarcerated, still prisoner of war, still burdened with their imprisonment. And had a hard time surviving that. He never looked too far ahead, never asked the questions, when are we going to get there? Tried to make the moments in front of him matter as much as they could so that he could continue holding on to his freedom. And to do so despite the fact that he was imprisoned. He was in a wilderness, and he lived that wilderness step by step, moment by moment, and helped him survive and thrive in a moment that was very difficult to do so. So the journey ultimately is really what is liberating here. It is not necessarily leaving Egypt or ending up in the promised land. It's kind of being on the move and learning and growing. All right, let's take a look. So along these lines, we reinforce Lech Lecha. We reinforce this notion of movement. Way back when I was finishing up rabbinic school, I wrote about Abraham as a seeker and as a patriarch. It was kind of it's all about archetypal motifs and spirituality. And one of the things I learned was that there's a certain spirituality that Abraham achieves as a seeker that requires him to move from one place to another. That in that movement, he's going to evolve spiritually. Not staying in one place, but moving. The journey, the going forward, opens up Abraham, opens up Sarah, opens up their co-travelers to a whole level of spiritual becoming. So let's have a look at what all that is about. Ellen, please. Abraham, our father. See that? Sorry.
Okay, ready, guys? Oh, you know what? Can I get my readers real quick? Hold on a sec.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Abraham, our father, was, wait, Lech Lecha, go forward. Abraham, our father, was simply told to leave. Go forth from your land and from your kindred and even from your father's house to the land that I will show you. This is the setting out, the leaving of everything behind, leaving the social milieu, and the preconceptions, the definitions, the language, the narrowed field of vision, the expectations, no longer expecting relationships, memories, words, or letters to mean what they used to mean. To be, in a word, open. If you think you know what you will find, then you will find nothing. If you expect nothing, then you will always be surprised and able to bless the one who creates the world anew each morning. So it is with setting out on this path of liberation and leaving everything. So it is with setting out on this path of liberation, leaving everything. He would even have to discover the way he would discover while he was on the way. Of him it was said, a man who set out and did not know for which place he was destined. And then in the next generation, Isaac had to set out with his father. Take your son, your only son. As Abraham had to leave his father, Isaac must leave his mother. And then in the next generation, Jacob had to set out, leaving behind his father and his mother and his brother. And Jacob went out from Beersheba. And then in the next generation, Joseph had to set out, leaving behind brothers, mother, and father. And they brought Joseph down to Egypt. And then in the next generation, of which there is record, Moses had to set out, and Moses fled, leaving behind his people. Again, another one alone in the wilderness, until at last all the people whose fathers had each set out in their generation, alone for the wilderness, leaving everything behind, were at long last themselves ready to leave the slave pits. There are great oral traditions about how they had to be tricked and manipulated into setting out. For to be sure, no one who sets out ever does so eagerly. But the children of Israel set out from Ramses, leaving everything behind them, for a promised land, but more probably death in the wilderness. Then there is being alone, in the most God-forsaken place where God visits after all, leaving one's house and one's parents and one's family. And finally, the slave pits themselves for a wilderness of no expectations. Somewhere where I will learn what I will learn, where I can see what I will see, what I will be. One after another, each of our fathers before us and mothers, with their strange Hebrew yen for the open places, heard this ancient God's voice telling them to leave their preconceptions for the wilderness.
Okay. Why is called to leave our preconceptions behind? The motion of going forward is not just going forward to a new reality. It is going forward to a new reality, but jettisoning preconceptions. It's all about preconceptions. We've heard that word a lot here today. Why do we have to leave? Why do we have to leave those preconceptions behind? Can't you just drop them wherever you are?
No, because they're always there to remind you if you stay in the same place.
Right. You become super familiar with the same place and super comfortable or comfortable enough, even if you're uncomfortable, with whatever preconceptions deny you a sense of becoming.
I think if you're going to start over and start anew, that you have to also be in a different environment because of the people that are around you. So like in Egypt, it would have been the people that were the slaveholders. And, if you live in a neighborhood where you get along with some people and not others, it's hard to start anew and fresh and forget about them if this irritation is in your neighborhood constantly.
Right. So a slave doesn't want to be a slave anymore, has to leave Egypt. In the case of Abraham and Sarah, they don't want to be polytheists anymore. So they have to leave in order to become monotheists.
Right.
Somebody who's seeking recovery from drugs or alcohol or some other addiction needs to not be in places where they will find their addiction fostered externally, right? So you gotta try and jettison all these things behind so that you can move forward and try and start anew. But what's interesting about this particular text is that it's not so important what the destination is. What's important is the leaving, the journeying, the moving forward, which is the requirement to leave certain things behind so that you can actually go forward. But it's sort of this constant going forward that is the spirituality. It's not, in fact, the destination. And so the desert has a way of being formless in that way, wide open. You don't really have specific destinations that you have to hit. We don't even know where Sinai is, right? The place of our revelation, the place where Torah was imprinted on our ancestors' hearts, gave them the blueprint to how to live their freedom. We think of Sinai as a destination, but it's really more of a peace of mind, isn't it? Okay, we can't find it. And yet it's the root of our freedom.
Wait, I thought they did know where it was.
Well, do we really?
I don't know. I mean, I was there where supposedly Mount Sinai,
Okay,
where Moses received the tablet.
I get it. Is it exactly that place?
Well,
I was
yeah,
born,
I don't know.
I was born at Mount Sinai.
There you go.
Me too.
I worked at Mount Sinai.
Me too.
All right. So
No,
I want to
Okay.
move into the next text here. I just do a time check. It's 11:56. If you have to leave at noon, feel free to do so. I can spend another 10 minutes making our way through. So if you have another 10 minutes, I'm happy to send it. So here's a different text that's sort of the opposite of their text, right? Which is telling us to jettison preconceptions. Here we're actually given permission to pack for our journey. That our journey is going to make more sense to us, going to be more precious if we can bring some valuable things along with us. All right, so what are we going to bring with us? There's a very specific idea of what we need to bring along with us. So who hasn't read yet?
I haven't read.
Linda, please.
What shall we pack for the journey? But he didn't tell them to leave everything behind, for we read that Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. Scripture makes known the excellence of Moses. While all Israel was busy taking up Egypt's booty, Moses busied himself with taking up the bones of Joseph. Rabbi Meir suggests that the people of each and every tribe were to take the bones of their own tribal father up with them. Here is the scene. Everyone's getting ready to leave. They bump into one another in their excitement. The car is loaded. The kids are screaming. The children are screaming. Now, one last time, did you forget anything? Oh my God, I forgot Joseph's bones. I don't even know where they were buried. People say that it was Sarah, daughter of Asher, who was still alive in that generation, and told Moses, Moses, Joseph is buried in the Nile River. How will you ever get to them now? Look, it's almost morning. We only have a few hours. No, Moses says, I must get the bones. And this resolve is accorded one of his greatest deeds. I too once floated in a tiny ark on that river. I know it well. For while we must leave our preconceptions behind, we cannot set out for the wilderness without bringing with us those who have come before. Maybe that is why Joseph made us promise.
I mean, this is really powerful and stunning and beautiful. One of Moses's great acts was to return and find Joseph, putting his life on the line, imperiling himself. And while it is imperative for us to leave behind our preconceptions that we're not worthwhile, that we're not deserving of freedom, that we can't live a life of Torah, that we don't amount to much of anything, leave all that behind in the narrow places and move forward to our greater spiritual awareness, our greater self-becoming, our greater capacity to be a collective force for good. All these things are there for us if we can jettison preconceived notions that we don't amount to much. However, one of the things that enables us to amount to something powerful are the legacies that we carry with us. This, by the way, is why we say Kaddish, is that we are not going to leave these legacies behind no matter what. We're going to use our freedom to be responsible to remember not only those who have died and the lives they lived, but the legacies that they taught us. The legacies allow us to live our freedom with a certain purpose and a certain dignity and a certain capacity to make a difference in life. We absolutely must carry that with us, or what's the point of the journey? What difference are we going to make if we don't have a plan? And, we can't just rely on ourselves to understand the plan. We have to look to our ancestors for the ways in which they made it through their lives and modeled for us how we can live in our lives. And we do the same for those who are younger than us and who succeed us. And when we're gone, hopefully people won't forget our bones, so to speak. And we'll carry our memories forward for a blessing. We'll carry our legacies forward for continued impact.
I have a question.
Yes.
We're told at the beginning of the book of Exodus that there were the Pharaoh that was there at the time, or at least at the beginning, was the first not to know Joseph. So was the story of Joseph then passed around? Because otherwise, how did we remember Joseph and remember to carry his bones?
I know. Yes, I realize that technically, literally, this may be a little hard to understand. So we are in Midrash here. Right? Pasikta de Rav Kahana is a form of Midrash. And so what they're trying to do is help us understand, in fact, how this possibly could have happened. Yes, Iris.
But in terms of story and knowing the stories, didn't they need to have passed down the stories starting with Abraham? Or else how did that get into the Torah?
Right. So one of the challenges in your question, and I appreciate the question, all the comments, is that one of the things that marked slavery was the incapacity, because of the enslavement, to connect with God in a way that the slaves' ancestors did.
Right.
right? What made slavery so bad was that they couldn't believe. They didn't have the freedom even to conjure up beliefs for God. That's how bad the slavery was. It was like they were living in a proverbial darkness that God was completely absent in. All right. In fact, the ninth plague, the plague of darkness, Choshech, so dark you could cut it with a knife. God is absent from that darkness. So in a sense, that was probably what it was like even in the daylight for our enslaved ancestors. And they could not make that connection with God. They could not, engage in Torah. And by the way, it's like, well, Rabbi, the Torah wasn't really been given yet till Sinai. Yeah, I get it. But they also said about Abraham that Torah, in a sense, was woven into his sinews and bones. It was in his very body. He embodied the Torah even before it was given. So in a sense here, Moses, before he receives the commandments at Sinai, also embodies Torah in some shape, way, or form. And so there's this communal collective memory that just sort of is there, even if literally it seems far-fetched, okay? Or the Torah doesn't support the course of events. So this is Midrash, and so it's sort of imagining, what are they going to do? There's this promise, possibly have left Joseph there. They had to rescue his bones. It's exactly what happened. And it impresses upon us the point that we have to make sure to carry forward these legacies, not just the bones, but the legacies. Oh, we have a couple more texts, so I think we can get to the end. Not that we're in a rush, right? We're in the Midbar. No real place to go except to be on our journey. Although I trust you might have something to do in the next few minutes.
I'm going to get going now, guys.
Okay.
Thank
Hope
you.
you'll join us. You were great. Thank you. Shabbat shalom to you.
Shabbat shalom almost.
Every Friday at 11, okay?
Yes, and Phoebe does not live with us now, but she does come by every Shabbat, and it's been wonderful.
Great. Well, tell
We
her
have a nice meal together.
Thank you much.
Okay, bye, everybody. Good to see you
Bye.
all.
Good Shabbat.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. See you. Good Shabbos. I want to do one bit of housekeeping because I notice who is 773-407-3590.
That would be Annie.
Annie. Okay. Hi, Annie.
Oh, now I'm unmuted. Sorry. I couldn't figure out how to unmute.
Hi, Annie. Nice to have you.
Hi, thank
Glad
you.
you're here.
It's wonderful
Alrighty.
to listen.
Welcome. Say hi to your family for me.
I will.
And
Thanks.
I hope you're all
was-
well. I hope you're all well.
We are. Thank you.
Super glad you enjoyed it and you joined us today. All righty. Who's ready to read? Cassandra, the bar mitzvah guest.
Sometimes, excuse me, sometimes I do a bar mitzvah once a week for many months in a row. And after the ceremony, there is a great welling up of completion and pride and promise. Strangers who have come as invited guests come up to share their joy. And I try to listen to each one of them and respond, but it is very difficult. They all say pretty much the same thing. What else is there to say? And then last Shabbos, there began one of those well-intended but empty exchanges that sometimes populate the minutes of rabbis after a service. I said to a man, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I don't know." Just what I needed, an existentialist. "Come on, where are you from?" But again, he insisted that he did not know. I looked more closely and saw that he was not an amnesia victim, a junkie, or an alcoholic. He was simply a human being who was moved by our worship experience and who had come forward. "Where are you from, Rabbi?" And then I realized what was going on and what I had learned. I told him that I didn't know where I was from either, for I understood that I didn't. "In that case, you understand what I'm trying to say," he said. And I did, and we parted.
Okay. What do we make of this interesting vignette?
I think the question started out as a concrete question. Where are you from? I'm from Chicago. But moved into a more existential conversation. Do we know where we're from or where we're going?
It's kind of a borderless open space. Doesn't really have definition. It's not a function of, I live in Chicago, I live in New York, or in this case, Sudbury, Massachusetts.
On the journey.
It's not limited to that. It doesn't give you the whole answer, right? In fact, on one level, you just had this moment of spiritual awakening or uplift or something that enabled a peaceful outcome, and he was kind of in the moment, and all the boundaries and the borders and the signposts and the milestones, what do you call it? Buildings that serve as landmarks. All that goes away. Doesn't matter. You're just sort of there. You know, if anything, he sees one foot in front of the other. Just there with the guy who had led him into service, helped him feel a moment of spiritual focus. Not in, not out, not up, not down, just sort of there. Not so much a Zen moment per se, though I guess I don't know that much about Zen. Maybe it could be a Zen moment, but it's really just a moment of presence. We talked about that presence in the desert. It just really pinpoints where you are in a moment. You're not really anywhere else but there, but you don't necessarily know because there's no real landmarks or signposts or directions. Do you think it's easy for us to live so completely in the present?
No.
Why?
It's a shaky ground. I mean, we're kind of doing that now, and it's a shaky ground.
Yeah. Well, remember earlier on in the very first text that we spent time on, they talked about how guilt can kind of anchor us in our past in a way. But in the desert, you know, you're not protected from the guilt that anchors you in your past. And it also talked about how, you know, our logic doesn't necessarily guarantee our future, right? So you're not protected from whatever hopes, dreams, anxieties you might have about the future. All that, you know, we're sort of liberated from, and you're sort of in the moment, which is really hard. I find in meditation, I like start hearing the self-talk. Oh, I'm getting tired. I'm not doing it right. I gotta fix what I'm doing. You can just hear the judgment. You know, I can't just be in the present. Teacher says, don't worry about that. Just laugh it off. Just be in the moment. Well, I can't be in the moment. I'm worried about what's coming up the next hour, or I'm mad about something that happened yesterday. A little hard to be in the moment. But the desert opens that. In this moment, where this person answers in a very boundaryless, very nondescript sort of way, actually describing a wide open space that just is, and that's powerful. All right, last text, a way of being. Ben, please.
A way of being. The wilderness is not just a desert through which we wandered for 40 years. It is a way of being, even if just for a moment, every now and then each day. For it is only way to begin. One who does not make himself ownerless, open like the wilderness, we will be unable to acquire human wisdom or God's word. That is why what was said in the wilderness. Sinai, Numbers Rabbah 1:7.
That's a midrash.
Right? And that must surely be why he brought us out there. For there and only there might we be able to encounter the mystery.
Okay. So key things. Mary Lou, we don't have to spend our whole existence in this experience that's just going to wear us out in a matter of minutes. But the idea is, how do we enter the desert? How do we enter into this fertile spiritual place, this ownerless, boundaryless place once in a while, or, for a minute or two each day. Incidentally, anybody know how we might practice this on a daily basis, or on a regular basis, or on a sometimes basis? Through prayer, through meditation, through physical spirituality, through walking out in nature, with masks on, of course. All of those are spiritual activities. Just talking to somebody today that said, I'm doing okay. I miss being at 5959 North Sheridan, but I go outside every day and I walk. And I have some of my most spiritual moments walking on the journey. Not getting to the destination, 5959 North Sheridan, but just walking wherever. And thinking and feeling and meditating and praying and whatever, right there, right on the walk. So what's the wisdom? What's the wisdom we can hope to achieve if we take this walk on the wilderness? What are some things we take away from our time today? What sort of human spiritual wisdom can we take if we live some part of our time in life in the desert?
We should live some part of our time that way.
Okay, so we know that there's a value to it, being on this journey. Is the destination as important as the journey?
No.
At least in the context of this teaching.
No.
No.
No, it is the journey that's the important part.
Right. And what's the other thing we learn about, the other bit of wisdom? About preconceptions.
Leave your preconceptions.
Do your best to leave them behind, because they will haunt you and keep you from being free. And what about what baggage do we unpack and leave it behind, and what baggage do we keep?
Don't forget your legacy.
Don't forget your legacy. You didn't create that on your own, right? Somebody came before you and helped you, even if you didn't know that person, right?
Right.
We didn't meet Moses directly, but we live out his legacy, right? It's a legacy of Torah. Okay. Thank you very much. Here we are on a journey trying to enter and encounter God's mystery. It is a beautiful journey. Don't exactly know where we're going to end up. I do know we'll be reading chapter 2 next time. I don't have my book. I forgot what the chapter's all about. Sod, I think, mystery. So I think this is a good segue into that. So don't hold me to that. We'll have fun with it regardless of what the subject is. I think it's about
Correct. It is
mystery. What's that?
It says Hod. I've got the book right in front of me.
Perfect. If you'd like to get the book, you can do some advanced reading. I'm really interested, particularly if everybody were to get the book, would it be essential for us to post up the text as is? It makes a lot of sense if you don't have the book, or you're listening on the phone, or both, right? For us to go through each text, everybody read it. But I don't know if that's exciting to you, or you think there's a better way to approach this, but I'd sure like to hear. We're really trying to put top quality, high impact stuff.
I like to see the text on the screen for focus.
Yeah.
Focus.
I
I
do.
agree, and I like hearing it. I think it's really good to read it and then discuss it right after, rather than maybe I read it a week ago.
Right. And then you can go
So
back
I
and
like
look
that.
at it in real time. All right, fine. That's good feedback.
I got the
Yep.
book for Kindle, just so I can go back to it when not in
Exactly.
town.
One of the things they've done in this Judaism 101 class is bring to bear books I think are among the most important in my library. I don't know a lot about Jewish mysticism, so I want to start here as a way of getting started. I think this is the most important book I know of to do that, written by a very important teacher of mine. And then The Jewish Way is another thing that we're doing. It's a very essential book in my library. That's about living the Jewish holidays, which, by the way, we're going to be having another class next week on Wednesday, Yom Ha'atzmaut, about Israel Independence Day. That's a class I'm going to try to get out some key texts to look at ahead of time. It'll help us. It's not quite as self-contained as these vignettes are. These vignettes lend to one slide, and it's just easy to digest. So where possible, we'll do that sort of thing. And in the other class, The Jewish Way, Yom Ha'atzmaut, we're going to look at some key texts about Yom Ha'atzmaut to gain some context of its significance and power in our lives. Lastly, Monday, kind of going out of order here, Monday 5, I'm going to teach A Life of Meaning, which is a primer on Reform Judaism. It's more than a primer. It really gets in deeply to why Reform Judaism is Reform Judaism. And we're going to enjoy that's broken up into like 55 chapters on all sorts of different issues. And so we'll be dealing with some theology on Monday, some thoughts about God. Okay, do you have a question, Iris? I see your hand up.
Oh, it was from a long time ago.
Oh, I just completely noticed it now. By the way, Iris, I can call you for 10 minutes right after this.
That's fine.
Yep. All right. I'll be in touch. All right.
Okay.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat
Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it all. See you later. Bye-bye.